big building. So it wasn't as if we had like minor aspirations.
I was woken out of my sleep about it. And I was like, who the hell took over the building? I couldn't think of who took over the building.
It was an illegal act that we were doing. We were trespassing in a big way.
Okay, someone's here to take over a building. You know, it may sound shocking now, but it wasn't so shocking then.
March 6, 1971. Boston area women gather at the Massachusetts State House for a rally and march to Cambridge, celebrating International Women's Day. Within a few hours, they had occupied 888 Memorial Drive, a former knitting factory and bookbindery owned by Harvard University, and proclaimed it a women's center.
Tennessee's Universe of 1970 in Blount County.
We're talking about 1970.
I put women on a pedestal, you know. Women are beautiful. All women, young women, old women, they're beautiful. And they're there to admire. I believe women belong at home, and after they raise their children, go out and work. I don't believe women should do men's work.
You opened the newspaper, and there were jobs for men and then jobs for women. There were just two sections. You couldn't apply for the jobs that were in the jobs men section, and of course they were much better jobs.
We don't want to be a man. We want the same jobs you have and the same pay.
I went to work at Viking Press in the summers, and I was always some guy's assistant.
Good morning, Jean.
Good morning, Mr. Williams.
The women were all in the publicity department, and the men were the editors.
Their words were more important. Their orgasms were more important. What they wanted for dinner was more important. And it was so invisible until it became visible.
My closest friend called me up and said, you know, there's these things starting, and they're called consciousness-raising groups. This is women getting together, talking about our lives, what we have in common, like our lack of self-confidence and our not taking ourselves seriously. We'd all had lots of the same experiences of organizing our lives around men, of worrying about our bodies.
It became so intense. It was the highlight of our lives. My women's group in Lexington, suburban housewives whose husbands made a lot of money at the time. They were all connected to Harvard or MIT, very smart husbands. We thought we had good marriages. Out of 13 women that started in that women's group, only 2 marriages survived.
For people to understand what we were doing, you really have to understand what the context was. The war was raging.
For the first time in history, we were seeing live war on our television screens.
There were many large demonstrations and street actions.
Let us save our national honor. Stop the bombing and stop the war.
The Black Panther movement was going on at the same time, and I was a Black Panther. And we were feeding the kids at the community center for breakfasts.
I was on welfare. I had left my husband, who was a batterer, and I got involved with welfare rights. And we demonstrated and had sit-ins at the welfare office.
There was a large new left in Boston. There have been takeovers of student buildings at Brandeis, of African-American students, at Harvard. The anti-war movement was growing in the Boston area. I had been involved with civil rights, anti-war activity, and like many other women, became aware of the sexism in those movements.
The women organized everything, raised all the money, and the men were always in the spotlight and always were taking all the glories.
On the surface, they were saying, we want liberation, we want to be a brotherhood of mankind all over the world. But they wanted to hang on to this subservient class of women.
We were expected to do the mimeographing, which is what we did in those days. We were expected to do the cooking and the cleaning, and of course, be sex partners.
In academia, things weren't much better for women.
When I came to Boston University in 1965, women were not permitted to wear pants. Not only not on the campus and not in class, but we weren't permitted to wear them in the common rooms in the dormitory.
In high school, I wanted to be an architect. I was set up with an architect in the community, and who was very nice, gave me books to read, etc. But he told me, he said, but I'm sorry, girls can't be architects.
By the time I got to graduate school, there were very few women. The young men were being very, very consciously mentored and groomed and prepared for a future. And I considered myself lucky to be treated with what I think of as sort of benign neglect.
I had gotten a National Science Foundation grant. I had an advisor at Harvard, and this was his advice. I think you should just go and get married and have children. You know, he said to me, you know, you're a very nice person.
Name, unmarried woman. Crime, not searching for a husband and not fulfilling my social role as wife and mother. Punishment, social ostracism.
I dropped out in 1969 to do political work, and I hooked up with some of my political friends, and we all decided that the place to be was Boston, because the women's movement was happening there.
Women were coming to Boston as a kind of a central location for the women's liberation movement.
Mr. John Smith, a trim young father of 3 who wears his silky brown hair attractively parted to one side, has announced that he is a candidate for the presidency. Married 12 years ago, he enjoys tending his garden and impressing friends with his special blueberry muffins.
You've got to remember that this was the 60s.
You had people who were breaking from their families' lives. Drugs were there, people were into imagination, think creatively.
I was supposed to be a good Jewish girl, married in a house with children and having maybe a teaching job on the side, and all of a sudden I'm at the forefront of a social movement where people are challenging the notion of a nuclear family.
I certainly was one of those people who did not believe in monogamy.
Where we're trying to change and sort out our relationships with men.
Bread and Roses women would go to Harvard Square and they would do ogle-ins, where they would treat the guys like the guys had treated them. They'd like whistle and they'd like come up to guys and cozy up and say, hey baby, wow, look at that.
Meanwhile, residents of the Riverside section of Cambridge, where 888 Memorial Drive was located, were fighting to stop Harvard University's expansion further into its neighborhood. This story was shortly to intersect with that of the 888 takeover.
Riverside was really a very diverse population. It was African Americans.
Well, they called it the Gold Coast because of the strong black population.
Greeks, Irish, Italians.
Along about 1956, Harvard started buying all of the property they could get their hands on. And if they were 2- and 3-family homes, they would evict the tenants. We came together and we said, look, we gotta stop them, we gotta do something or all of us will be gone. Harvard had bought the whole front of the river. And so Treeland Bindery was the last site that they were going to build on.
Harvard wanted to build student housing, married student housing in that area. And the Riverside community wanted low-income housing.
We sent a letter to Harvard.
We said, okay, you want to build, then you build affordable housing for low-income people. For as many affordable housing units you took, we want you to put them back into our community.
Some of us figured that we should march on Harvard, because we could march around Harvard, but the best thing was Harvard's graduation.
So all of us went into the line of procession with our babies and everything. And we got down to the 3rd row. There was this gentleman who talked about the oppressed people of the world. And I said, that's the key. Let's show them the oppressed people of their neighborhood. So we jumped over the chairs and we go up to the stage.
We are here to demand that Harvard University give to the residents of the Riverside area free land so that we can build low-income houses for the poor people of Texas. We have been here longer than you'll ever be here, and we are not going to move because of you.
President Pusey at the time says, get off the stage. And I said, no. Fortunately for us, there was the black Harvard police officers, and they went to them, and they said to them, we want you to take him off the stage. And they said, no way. After about 35 minutes of trying to negotiate us off the stage, he decided to get 3 of the corporate members to go with us.
Members of the Harvard Corporation have very generously volunteered to go to University Hall to meet with this group, in which case we may go forward. We'll do that.
And while we was in there, we found out that the Vietnam people had taken over the stage too. So I guess they had a terrible graduation because I didn't see the end of it.
There was an excitement at the time and an energy and a sense of possibility. I was in Weatherman at the time. I was a secret member of the Weather Underground organization.
We all went to New Haven at the time when Erica Huggins, a member of the Black Panther Party, was a prisoner there.
Erica Huggins was on trial for conspiracy to murder and was eventually acquitted.
We felt a real bond at that point with the Panthers in this fight against political repression.
The Viet Cong were winning. We were outraged by what was happening in the United States. And we felt we could be part of that movement of winning a revolution, and we thought it was going to be right then.
So that's the context in which we now here in Boston in 1970 think International Women's Day is coming up. We thought we needed something dramatic. So one of the women pulls us together. We meet in the basement of her house for security reasons. And we begin to have a kind of whispering discussion of what kind of dramatic event could we plan.
It's my memory that I had the idea of why don't we take over a building to popularize the idea of a women's center.
Taking over a building, taking something you didn't own and wanting to claim it as your own.
I actually thought it was a bad idea, that it just wouldn't happen, that we would get caught.
I was part of Bread and Roses, and there was a committee in Bread and Roses to try and find a women's center for Cambridge. You know, there weren't a lot of women's centers around then. This was kind of a new and neat idea.
There would be meetings, there would be classes, there would be auto mechanics.
We just needed a large space that was dedicated to women in the women's movement.
And we were thinking of finding a women's center in some legal way. We weren't thinking of building takeovers. But they came up with this plan of doing it over International Women's Day.
What we thought we would do is take over the building at the same time that the march was going on.
So there were 2 groups working from the very beginning. A group that would stage a takeover of a building, and the group that would plan the public event of a march.
And they were making progress, and frankly, we weren't making that much progress. And it was going to be fun, you know? This was going to be a fun thing to do, so we didn't want to miss out.
We kept it to a particular group of women that we all knew. We did understand that secrecy was needed.
There we were in Boston, surrounded by MIT, Harvard. They both had war research facilities. I mean, Henry Kissinger had been at Harvard. So we thought, let's try to target one of these universities.
We came up with this idea of searching for buildings. Somebody looked at MIT, and Laura Whitehorn looked at Harvard and discovered 888 Memorial Drive.
I found this building that was down on Memorial Drive, away from the rest of Harvard. It was only used like 3 days a week or something. A couple of times there was no one there, and once or twice there were people there, and then I just did this whole act about, ooh, what's in here? Let me see. And I walked around, and it was this big building with huge space downstairs and a huge space upstairs, and it seemed perfect.
When I was a student at Harvard, the place that I hated the most was 888 Memorial Drive, because that's where we had our structures class. And the professor was particularly negative towards myself and the other woman who was in school with me. And the guy who had the drafting table next to me would come in from the gym and literally hang his sweaty jockstrap on the homosode in between our two desks.
Double, double, sisters in trouble. We'll hex your empire and make it crumble.
We went the night before. We'd found a way that we thought would be the best way in. There was a boarded up basement window, and we unscrewed the screws and then just kind of left them there.
The next morning, we went first, and we pulled that off, and we got in, and we were inside.
And to our great surprise, we found a guy there.
Oh my God, who is he and what is he doing here at, 7 o'clock in the morning?
I was sitting in my office, presumably doing some work, when I heard some individuals come in. And then I recall someone, a very clearly spoken person, said something to the effect, we've come to occupy the building.
He reached for the phone. I guess he was going to, call the police or something like that. So we took the phone from him.
It turned out that there was a locked door between the first and second floors, and we needed the entire area. So we asked him for the keys, and I remember we kept, sort of huddling. He didn't want to give us the keys.
We didn't know what the heck to do.
I just gathered my things together, stuffed them into something as elegant as a box as I recall, and simply walked out the door.
I was helping to organize a demo, and we met periodically with the women who were planning the takeover. We had to be coordinated because our timing was very precise.
Someone from the march that was down at the Commons called a phone in a deli nearby. They let us use their phone. And we said, yes, we're inside, it's okay, bring people here.
As we gathered at the Boston Common for the march, most women knew nothing at all.
I was there to support the March for International Women's Day and also to try to get solidarity for our boycott of South Africa. The March for International Women's Day started from the State House in Boston by the Common. And then we passed the Playboy Club, a clear symbol in Boston at the time of the oppression of women and the exploitation of women, and a very active, celebrated kind of thing that men did.
It was freezing, and the ice was all broken up on the streets that we were walking through, so our feet began to freeze.
The march was the best we'd had, singing, "We are the women, and we are marching. Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao."
We are marching for liberation. We want the revolution now.
And then we marched to the Charles Street Jail to talk about the rights of women, particularly poor women. And I can remember shouts going back and forth between the women in the jail and the women on the bridge in terms of acknowledgement that there were people who cared.
We had to break down the door to the second floor, and that was why there was noise from inside the building that the neighbors heard, and why the police came to check it out.
As the police were coming closer and closer into the building, the most incredible fear I've ever experienced in my life, cold sweat.
The cops came up to the front door and they banged on the door, and we just didn't say anything. It's an abandoned building. So they turned and they went away. We were so relieved.
I was just in heaven. I mean, here were all these women and some other guys walking across the bridge, and for people who know Boston, that's a very powerful kind of an image.
We crossed the bridge to Cambridge, shouting, "Out of the kitchens and into the streets! Out of the kitchens and into the streets!" It was the only demonstration I had ever been on that was that much fun.
I went to the demonstration, I was on the march, and at some point in the march they said, "We're gonna go take over this building." And I thought it was a fabulous idea.
So we were walking down Mass Ave and into Central Square and expected just to go right on up to Harvard Square. And suddenly we all turned left on Pearl Street.
The Cambridge cops, the Boston cops, everybody was a little confused about why is this group of women going down this teeny little street in the heart of Cambridge. The police car would go straight, and then we would take a turn, and then they would have to like double back and catch up with us, and then they'd try to be leading us, and then we would take another turn, and they had no clue. And there were probably only about 10 of us who really knew where we were going.
The only work for women was to clean and type and file. That's why we're marching on.
We did eventually chip away at the door frame and force the door open.
I remember being upstairs and looking out the windows and, waiting to spy and see when everybody was coming.
And then, somehow we turned a corner and there we were in front of this building.
I was exhilarated when we reached what was revealed to be a destination.
We opened the doors, the banner unfurls, and hundreds of people just start pouring into the building, having no idea what we're doing, except that we then say, "Welcome to the new Women's Center of Cambridge. This is now our building."
I remember people just started cheering and yelling.
And anxiety turned to euphoria as the beauty of the place sank in.
It was a great building because it had so many windows. There was a lot of light.
There was just an absolute joyous feeling of having that space and having a good-sized space where you could kind of spread out.
We read a solidarity statement saying that we had taken over the building in solidarity with the women and all the people of Vietnam and with the Riverside community.
We thought basically it was a one-day event and that we would be thrown out by that evening. But Harvard had no idea what was going on. And the police outside showed up, but they weren't doing anything. So then we realized, hey, now we have this building, what are we doing? So people had to go home and get their sleeping bags, and so nobody came with their sleeping bags.
I went into that building on the first day, and I was there through the entire occupation.
Some people left and came back. Some people would go to work. Some people go home and take a shower.
I never stayed there overnight, although when I asked my ex-husband, Paul, what did he remember, he said, "You were never home."
I stayed probably not more than 2 nights, and it was really cold.
It was dark, it was cold, it was March.
I remember bundling up in sleeping bags and lying on the floor.
For security purposes, we had people stationed at the front door, and my memory is that you were frisked as you came in.
Any woman stripped of her camera was free to join us.
And you stood at the front door and made sure that men didn't get too close, and you turned people away.
The women in the building didn't want men to come in. They wanted it to be women's only space.
It was in the newspaper. It was on the radio. It was on television.
I was driving in, and on public radio, they suddenly made this announcement that these women had taken over a building, a warehouse at Harvard. And I just thought, far out. And I went over. It felt great, and I wanted to stay there, and I wish I didn't have to go back home.
In 1971, I was the spouse of a dean at Harvard. I went to see 888 Memorial Drive. I had on my mind the question about how negotiations could possibly happen with respect to the taking over of the building. I was told that the women in the building would not deal with a male. I was concerned about the building being tear gassed that first night.
The takeover at 888 came in the wake of a brutal bust on the Harvard campus 2 years earlier. Students were hauled out by their hair, they were beaten up, they were injured, they were gassed.
So I called Polly Bunting, but she would not intervene. So I probably went directly to Archibald Cox.
He gave me the name of Susan Lyman.
Susan said she would come right over. She went and introduced herself to people in the building.
They thought if I went in and persuaded the girls to come out of there, they'd come. But I didn't think necessarily they would for me. And they had a purpose, and it should have been listened to.
She entered the fray, obviously, with greater sympathies than other people at Harvard.
The first night, Harvard turned off the electricity and the heat. So all of a sudden, there were these groups of women who went out. They re-hooked up the, I guess, fuses, the fuse box. They rewired something, but we had light. They couldn't turn on the heat because that was central.
You know, plumbing, we had horrible plumbing problems. You know, I don't remember, there was like 2 toilets for, you know, all of the women. And we had people who knew how to muck around with pipes and get that stuff to work.
A member of my community called me and said, Sandra, did you take over 888 Memorial Drive? And I said, no. She said, well, a group of women took over the building. I said, Lois, who are they? She said, I don't know. She said, I've never seen them before. I said, what? They took over the building? I said, why didn't I think about that?
I was called by one of the representatives of Harvard University asking me how many community people were inside the bindery.
What is it you want? You get those women out. I'm not negotiating for those women. You negotiate yourself. So I went to 888 and talked to some of the women. They had said, look, one of our demands is low and moderate income housing for the community. And that was good, and we started working with them around that.
Over the years, Harvard and MIT have been eating up all the land in Cambridge that belongs to the people who live here. This site here should be for low-income housing for the people in this area.
It never was before.
Well, but it should be, because these people shouldn't be moved out just for Harvard to have places for them. This morning, we were served with a notice from the health department calling our building unfit for use by a large number of people.
Harvard was saying the women have to get out of there because it's not sanitary, there aren't enough bathrooms.
But there is, in fact, no other place in this society where women can get together to meet our own needs. We have already begun to provide childcare, a health class, a karate class, an auto mechanics class.
I think what impressed me most was the auto mechanics. And I did subsequently start to repair my own car.
You know it's just going to be a matter of time before they come and get you out, so one way or the other. What are you going to do then?
And we had these cans of surplus peanut butter up on the second floor above the front door in case the pigs tried to come in and we'd throw them down on them. Of course, that never happened, but it made us feel very tough.
Female informants who've been inside say the group is well stocked with groceries. And as long as the power stays on and the news media stays attentive, the women will stay. In spite of the paint-splashed slogan which says, the revolution will not be televised, it will be live. Andy Macmillan, Channel 5 News, Cambridge.
It was like a carnival, like, you know, chaotic, but people were happy. I remember people giving karate lessons.
I remember the excitement, the sense that everyone was talking to everyone, the sense there was a great deal of affection.
You know, I didn't know a soul, so I also felt shy. And I thought these women were much more together and urban, and you know, I was just this suburban housewife, mommy.
A woman I had never met before said, I have a child the age of your child. I'm looking to start a playgroup. I said, what's a playgroup? And she said, shared daycare. We would take care of each other's children so each of us could work. And we met every weekday for the next 5 years until our children entered kindergarten. I remember kids, a lot of kids, And also, I think they invited kids in from the neighborhood and had balloons and food.
Right by 88 Memorial Drive, there was a parking lot, and we used to jump rope there, ride our bikes there as kids. And we also played at the dilapidated building. Some of us who were more adventurous played inside. That was our hangout.
Well, some people from the community gave us blankets, they gave us sleeping bags, giant, containers of stew.
We would call WBCN and say, we're hungry, we need food. And an hour later would come a station wagon from Brookline.
There I am, living in the burbs, married with a kid, going into this building with my casserole dish. So I'm sitting there not knowing where to put the food. And it was this vast space filled with women. I saw two women in an adjoined sleeping bag together. And I felt like a voyeur, because I was like glued to everything.
But not everybody was happy with the lesbians' displays of affection.
I heard from other straight women that they felt uncomfortable with the physical contact between the lesbian women in the building because there wasn't much privacy there. So incidents around that mounted. A straight woman insisted she'd been assaulted. Another asked the lesbians to leave, lest they frighten neighborhood women away.
It was hideous to be gay, just absolutely hideous. Homosexuality was officially on the list of the American Psychiatric Association's list of mental illnesses. You could have forcible psychiatric therapy, electrotherapy.
Name, gay woman. Crime, loving my sisters. Punishment, condemned to a mental institution as abnormal and insane, and a threat to the social system of heterosexuality.
In 1970, 1 year before the takeover of 888 Memorial Drive, a group of lesbians planned to join a women's march co-sponsored by the National Organization for Women in New York City.
Betty Friedan was asked, what are you going to do? We hear rumors that lesbians are going to come and take over your march. And she said, I will not be cowed by the Lavender Menace. And, we went apeshit. We had come out for the first time ever marching as lesbians. And we received a lot of flack for that. The women's movement had no greater consciousness than general society about homosexuality because there wasn't a movement yet to educate them. I must say that feminists got over it faster than, say, Republicans.
We're here because we don't agree with the tactic of taking over buildings that have nothing to do with your cause, just to make a statement.
And we urge that those who are illegally occupying the building do not leave immediately. They be prosecuted swiftly and, if necessarily, evicted.
A friend approached me about going to a dance at 888, and my initial response, sort of unthinking response, was, how can there be a dance because there are no men?
The straight feminists, like to dance, like circle dance and all hold hands and go around, or come into the center and come out and dance in big groups and stuff. And we were all bumping and grinding, doing what we call the lesbian two-step, sort of hump on this side, then hump on that side.
They had a lesbian culture already. So there was this clash.
Very quickly, of course, the straight women wanted to get a little humping going on too.
After getting past my embarrassing comment, happily went along and had a wonderful time dancing there at 888, where so much was going on that I didn't understand. But, a takeover is a takeover, and I'm always for a good takeover.
It
is day number 4 of this takeover of a building by women's liberationists. The lunch truck stops here regularly now. It's part of the scene, along with the new signs, the new rumors, and the theater of the streets here in Cambridge.
And further, we command you from endorsing or encouraging any person to engage in any above mentioned acts, or supporting by the furnishing of food or supplies or otherwise the continuing trespass in the Harvard Architectural Technology Workshop.
The Harvard administration got an injunction against us, and the police would come down to read the injunction out. And we had gotten some sort of legal advice, I don't know how good this advice was, that you have to be able to hear the injunction for it to count.
And further, we command you from congregating within or about any Harvard building or premises in such manner as to disrupt or interfere with normal functions or work conducted by or on behalf of Harvard.
As we're there for a couple of days, tons of people are coming, and some object to what we were doing. They say, we don't think anyone should do any kind of activity that hurts private property.
I was mostly involved in gay liberation activities. I was not really involved in the women's movement per se. And I just felt like, why pick on this one particular building of this one particular institution? Why should they give up one of their buildings to the women's movement?
Why that building? There were only 2 classes a week that were given in that building. So we felt that Harvard had this big building, huge resource. We had no place to put a women's center. Seemed like the place to do it.
There's so many images from being inside that building. I mean, from hearing women having sex for the first time in the other room.
Doreen Carrito plucked me out of heterosexuality in the building in a zipped up sleeping bag on the floor.
And whole days where people cut their hair, and all these women with long hair ended up with short hair.
Maybe 100 women got their hair cut.
You know, everybody's drinking, and this friend said, haircuts in the back, you know, and everybody swarmed to the back. And I got the worst haircut in the world, and I just was in heaven because now I look like a lesbian.
The lesbians were so dynamite. They were so competent. They knew how to do so much shit. They were so taking care of business in the center that everybody wanted to be a lesbian.
I was able to finally join in, stand up. Yes, I'm a lesbian.
I'm a straight woman. I was married. I mean, I don't remember feeling hostile or anything about it, just kind of like this is what was happening, and I wasn't really part of it.
You know, there's some tensions between gay women and straight women, and I considered myself bisexual, so I was a sort of, that was really tainted, being a bisexual woman at the time. It was kind of like, oh, so you don't have the guts to be a lesbian.
I remember, you know, particularly the challenge that the lesbians raised, this great pleasures of being with women, of dancing with women, but now people were taking it to a new level of sleeping with women, and, you know, there was some discussions about how this is the next step of feminism. And I remember a prolonged debate about whether people should be able to make out in meetings. And I remember puzzling over this, like, would this be productive to, like, move people forward or not? And, you know, what was the past of, did people make out in other meetings I'd been at? No. You know, what was the new possibility of this?
It says in my notes from that time, as dawn broke, 2 others came to relieve our watch, and I picked my way across the sleeping bodies on the floor, all rolled up in blankets and in sleeping bags, most alone, but some lying in each other's arms. One couple, a young black woman and her even younger white lover, made me stop with my heart thudding for the grace and love in their embrace. Everyone in sight was asleep but me. All these women's faces, necks, and bare arms, tops of shirts or sweaters, even a few pajamas peeking out of the bedrolls. The faces of women sleeping are beautiful.
I remember Archibald Cox standing outside the window with a megaphone yelling at us, trying to get us to come out. So they actually sent their top dog
Archibald Cox, who was later Solicitor General of the United States, who was then at Harvard Law School.
And he was trying to be very friendly and sort of lure us out, and we're like yelling and screaming. That was also when we started to realize this is really working. This is a successful action.
The Harvard administration was, whereas Archie was more lenient and intelligent and listening to what was going on.
No intelligent person could contemplate without anguish police action to clear the building of women.
A waitress at the Harvard Faculty Club who was in and out of the building would wait on Archibald Cox and his friends at lunch and overhear them discussing strategies for getting us out of the building. And you can hear him really struggling with the idea that it's immoral to negotiate with terrorists, basically. But on the other hand, there are children in the building as well as women in the building, and so what can we do?
Harvard still hadn't quite figured out how many of the people inside were students and how many weren't. Because if they knew that there were no Harvard-related anybody, they probably would have moved much faster and would have kicked us out.
Somebody was always out there looking to see if the police were coming. I think we had like 2-hour watches or something like that, and we would just look out the window. That's all I remember.
We thought if the police would come, they'd come in the front, but we thought, well, we better protect the back. So a number of women had this idea of spreading marbles all around the back door, so that if they came in, not only would you get this noise, but they likely would fall down. And that would give us the edge then in being able to stop them.
Within the building, there were constant rumors and fears that there was going to be a bust at any time.
We were afraid that at some point the police would break in, bust our heads open, drag us out of there.
The behavior of the police around the building got less and less comfortable for me personally. I remember the state police as being particularly threatening, intimidating, dressed with helmets and in riot gear, expressing an interest at any moment to attack.
There was a group of men who were our friends who volunteered. They wanted to do something. These guys, they would, get in their car and go monitor the police station, which was very near us. There's a Central Square police station.
We had somebody in the community who had a police radio, so we used to get word that the police are talking about massing outside of 888 and taking care of business. And so we'd get these real scares, and people would go into massive meetings about what are we going to do and how are we going to respond.
Following Archibald Cox's announcement that police action might become necessary, Sandra Graham of the Riverside community called a press conference to express community opposition to police intervention.
The threatened actions of Harvard and the Cambridge police against these women are no different from the police violence which has always been used against the people of this community.
They used to beat them black kids and the students like you wouldn't believe. If you had long hair, they would beat you.
Our children have seen violence by the Cambridge police force when they were called in to evict a community family, when they refused to pay skyrocketing rents brought on by the expansion of Harvard University into our community. Now our children will witness another act of violence if Harvard calls in the Cambridge police force and their canine dogs to bust the women who occupy one of their buildings.
We got so into that we were going to maintain ourselves here and certainly not let the police eject us, that we started accumulating bricks and heavy things up on the second floor. There were some people that said, whoa, we could break people's heads with that stuff. Is that really what you want to do?
One night, I was lying there trying to sleep, and I overheard people next to me talking about a negotiation that had happened with Harvard. I didn't even know about it. And at first, I was kind of, oh, we shouldn't negotiate with them.
Harvard had felt that they needed to talk with the women in the building, and that they thought that there might be a way to move them out without having confrontation.
I was at a meeting with Tess Ewing
and a woman from Radcliffe asking that Radcliffe support the purchase of a building for the Women's Center.
I remember very steady negotiations toward the end of that period, and Susan Lineman was asked for financial help.
Susan Lyman tried unsuccessfully to raise funds from her Radcliffe contacts.
In the last analysis, it was easier to come up with the money myself. It was my money, bang.
Sue Lyman promised us $5,000. The donation was not from Harvard. It was from Sue Lyman. And it was because she believed in, the idea of a women's center. She thought that was a good idea.
I think we worked it out that having the money to put a down payment on a women's center constituted a victory.
A majority of the people thought we should take the deal and leave the building.
I was dead set against it. How can we leave when, we're abandoning the Riverside community, we're abandoning all the things that we stand for?
Some people felt very strongly that we should never give up the center, and if the police came and they charged in, that we should fight for the center.
So there was debate about to what degree do we carry through this militancy? Will being arrested serve the interest of this cause, or will it just make us look bad?
What we wanted changed with each meeting and each new composition of the we. Women who left a meeting thinking it had been decided that we would stay and meet arrest came back 3 hours later to find the opposite decision.
It took 4 or 5 days of discussion.
There was a lot of debate about it because, it's one thing to seize and hold a building, and you're doing, breaking and entering, I don't know what they would have charged us with. It's another thing to fight with the cops. Now, that was something that I liked to do. I found it very liberating.
I was for political reasons, in favor of staying and fighting, but I was afraid. I was personally afraid.
I took the position that I didn't want to stay and fight.
Some other women around me said that they weren't going to stay, and I added my voice to theirs and said, well, I wasn't going to stay either.
On Monday morning, Archibald Cox, losing his patience, returned to court to ask for a permanent injunction to remove the women from the building. An attorney for the women appeared in court to challenge the injunction.
This was really a case of not having much of a defense against trespass per se, but the fairness of what Harvard was doing and what it wasn't doing to help women.
As far as women's liberation goes, let my wife come and shovel out my driveway as well as I do. That's when there will be women's liberation.
There was a feeling at that point that we had a hostile judge.
I demand that the police get the bums out of there. It is up to the police to arrest the women if they do not leave in 10 minutes from this moment.
I'm not sure how the word got to us, but we did know that there were at least a busload or a large number of police a couple of blocks away.
And at the moment at which we heard, no, now they're really, really coming to bust us, we made the decision to leave in victory.
People felt that we'd made our point and that nobody should get hurt.
The minority, I think, thought, we can only fight so long.
I was saddened that we didn't have a larger group that was going to stand our ground.
And within an hour, we had the building cleaned out, and we're marching down the street to Harvard Square singing songs of victory and hoping that we had witnessed a victory, not a defeat.
It might have been just part of youthful exuberance or whatever. We have to do those things when we're youthful because we don't have the energy when we're 80 years old.
I guess we could say we were naive, but it didn't cause any damage, and it raised issues, and often we got good results.
It was a pivotal thing which unleashed a tremendous amount of progressive social energy from Boston.
No one in the building.
After leaving 888 Memorial Drive, women found and purchased a house at 46 Pleasant Street in Cambridge. It opened as a women's center in January 1972.
Having that physical place to go and meet, feel safe, feel pride, was a wonderful boon to all of these groups that started, rape crisis centers, cancer, community cancer projects.
I love the Women's Center. Women just immediately feel comfortable here.
It's all because in 1971, a group of women take over the Harvard building.
We were really building the second wave of a very independent women's movement that was one of the most, if not the most powerful, independent movements for social change internationally.
People think they're not powerful. They are powerful, only if you come together.
Because Harvard bought up everything they wanted to in Riverside, there's no more fight. We got wiped out, but it took them 30 years to wipe us out.
When I came here this morning, I looked at my dear beloved girlfriend, who is, what do I call her, my wife, my spouse, my partner, Susie Day, and I thought, if it hadn't been for Memorial Drive and for that action, I might never be in this, wedded bliss.
The Women's Center is still in existence.
Is it?
It's the longest continuously operating community women's center in the world, probably.
Oh, really? Really? I'm glad to hear that.
And you played a big part in.
Well, it makes me feel good. Good.